There once was a 25-year-old man named Tim who lived a seemingly normal life. He had a job, friends, and hobbies, but he often found himself questioning the reality of his existence. As time went on, Tim began to experience strange and horrific moments that made him question his sanity. At first, it was just small things like glimpsing shadowy figures out of the corner of his eye or hearing whispers in empty rooms. But as the days turned into weeks, the occurrences became more frequent and more intense. Tim would see grotesque monsters with twisted features and glowing eyes, and he would hear guttural voices speaking in languages he didn't understand. Despite these terrifying experiences, Tim tried to push on and live his life as normally as possible, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish between what was real and what was not. He found himself doubting his own memories and even his own identity. One day, while walking home from work, Tim was suddenly whisked away to a dark void. He floated in the emptiness, feeling disoriented and lost. He could see nothing, hear nothing, and feel nothing but the cold emptiness surrounding him. As he drifted aimlessly, a thought began to take shape in his mind. Am I real? He had no way of knowing for sure. He was alone in the void, with no reference points or sensations to anchor him to reality. He couldn't even be sure if he was truly floating or if it was all just a hallucination. As the uncertainty gnawed at him, Tim realized that he had to find out the truth. He began to search for a way out of the void, using all of his strength and determination to break free from the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, Tim finally saw a faint light in the distance. He swam towards it, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in what felt like forever. As he emerged from the void, he found himself back in the world he knew, but everything was different. He was in a place that was familiar, yet strange and unfamiliar at the same time. Tim looked around, taking in his surroundings. He saw people going about their lives, but they seemed to be moving in slow motion. The colors around him were dull and muted, and the air was thick and heavy. He realized that he had been transported to some sort of alternate dimension. As he made his way through the streets, Tim encountered otherworldly beings that were unlike anything he had ever seen before. They were grotesque and terrifying, but also strangely familiar. He knew deep down that he had seen these creatures before in his nightmares and hallucinations. Despite his fear, Tim continued on, determined to find a way back to the reality he knew. He wandered through the streets, searching for something, anything that could help him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tim stumbled upon a portal that seemed to lead back to his own world. He stepped through it, unsure of what awaited him on the other side. As he emerged from the portal, Tim found himself back in the world he knew, but everything was different. The colors were brighter, the air was lighter, and the people around him were moving at a normal speed. He had made it back to reality. Tim took a deep breath, relieved to be back in the world he knew. But the experience had left him shaken, and he couldn't shake the thought that kept echoing in his mind. Am I real? He didn't know for sure, but at least he was back in a world that felt real to him. Despite his relief at being back in the reality he knew, Tim couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He felt disconnected from the world around him, as if he were just a spectator rather than a participant. As the days went on, Tim's mental state continued to deteriorate. He found himself struggling to focus and concentrate, and he was plagued by nightmares and hallucinations. He began to withdraw from his friends and family, unable to cope with the overwhelming sense of isolation and disconnection. Eventually, Tim's mental health reached a breaking point. He was unable to function in society and was forced to seek help. He was admitted to a mental health facility, where he spent the rest of his days struggling to come to terms with the horrific experiences he had endured. Despite the care and support of the doctors and staff at the facility, Tim was never able to fully recover. He spent the rest of his life in a constant state of confusion and fear, unable to distinguish between what was real and what was not. As he grew older, Tim's mental state continued to deteriorate. He became a shell of his former self, a mere shadow of the person he once was. He died alone and forgotten, his mind and spirit broken by the horrors he had experienced. The last thought to cross his mind was the same one that had haunted him for so long. Am I real? But now it was a question that would never be answered.